ESP.bet. Watch and bet live.
Okay, this is episode 28 of Narrative Wake. And if you can see my camera, they can't, but again, just letting people behind the curtain there. Unfair advantage that I have on every single one of the shows we do. No, I'm actually in a hotel room, and sadly, because of how, funnily enough, I'm actually in Sweden, but this is actually very American in the sense that I've noticed in American hotel rooms, it's just never allowed to have full light coverage across the room. You'll never find like a big fluorescent light that properly lights a room. We all know this from going on the road and trying to do videos. You'll never get proper lighting unless you do it at like exactly 1 p.m. with the window open in a southern face. I don't know what the fucking angle would have to be. But anyway, as a result, yes, I am just a nearly middle-aged man in a hotel room, in the dark, with a laptop open, doing some sort of a video game podcast with two young women trying to make their way in the industry. One day, maybe this will come back to haunt me. Who knows? Maybe this is where it all began to unravel, all came apart. Not only that, but obviously, usual host Thorin, usual co-host Kelsey Moser. Don't worry, it's not an NA LCS episode. Still like the old days. Still all fine. Everything's okay. Nothing to worry about. Still going to criticize the fuck out of everyone. But you're probably thinking to yourself, yeah, I know Emily Rand. She was on some of the past episodes. She was on those like mega... Thorin, wait a minute. Don't you host another show with her? You haven't run out of guests for this week or something, have you? And just quickly tagged someone in. No, I just really respect Emily's take on North America and really wanted to get to know what she thought about that, because I felt like... So I just wanted to expose the Western audience to Emily's insights on NA, because it seems like a shame to work in that region and get on the front page like one time in about a decade. So trying to right some of the wrongs. Nothing I can do beyond that. Not allowed to run those groups where you upvote each other, which I actually technically never did, but nevertheless, I was put to the sword for the crimes of others. Sadly, NDAs prevent me from talking about that. So enough of that. Luckily, all those people don't work in esports anymore in front of the camera. And on that note, we'll now begin episode 28. So, NA LCS. That's what we're talking about here, Emily. No one gives a fuck about LCK on this show. I know Papa Smithy tried through some sort of really dodgy, changing of definitions and terms, to claim that everyone loves LCK. They don't. No one gives a fuck. Meanwhile, best of ones. I've got to give credit to Riot. It is for plebs, but it has absolutely... I think the effect has been pretty noticeable. People seem way more hyped about these games. What do you think?
So I am not... So initially when they announced Best of Ones, I was like, yes, so many fewer games I have to go back and watch. Because basically, for people who don't know, I'm pretty much at LCS every weekend, and that means that it is sometimes a lot more difficult to watch the games in person because I'll be going to interview someone and I'll miss a lot of really important context to what's going on in the game. So I would have to go back and watch a lot of games. And so initially I was pretty hyped, but I've found that it's really hard, or it's a lot more difficult to get a handle on individual teams' play styles within a best of one. And I also, not to throw anyone under the bus, because it's a blanket question that I've asked a ton of players, that I always ask them, how do you feel about best of ones? And I have not had one player tell me they like it. So yeah, I think it's a lot, it feels a lot better for, and I know other players and coaches have come out and said publicly that they actually like best of ones. So I know it's not everyone, but I get the general sense that it's just a lot easier to tell a team's overall. I can explain a lot of teams in Korea, right? And I can be this is the team that does this typically, and this is the team that does this typically. And even having watched all of NA, I still sometimes hesitate to describe a team's specific play style because sometimes they might not have one, especially kind of the middle of the pack is still trying to figure itself out with all of these new rosters, coming off of a really, really quick free agency period, basically, where everyone kind of assembled these hybrid rosters almost immediately. So I still think that is also something that needs to be taken into consideration when looking at NA, because in best of ones, despite the fact that I know practice hasn't changed in terms of like you still would scrim in best of threes, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
On stage for developing your team, it's still fewer games. So that also kind of factors into it when you have a lot of these rosters, even with imports that have been in North America for a while, they're still on different teams. So teams are still trying to figure themselves out. So I guess I'm probably out of the loop when it comes to the public perception, but that's kind of my overall take on best of ones.
Kelsey, let me ask you about this then, because one thing that might seem like an obvious statement, but it actually does get lost on people, is to some people, they think when you talk about format that it's like identical. Like a best of one, in terms of the context of how a team will actually approach it in the LCS, is very different from a best of three. It's not just one game. It's not like we only played the first game and not the next two, right? I mean, for example, if you had to tie this into what's going on at the moment, in the past, people would have said, I mean, famous examples of this, every team that Keen played for, it leads to a lot more cheese sometimes, or like one-off weird picks that you wouldn't be able to do over the series. But at the other end of the equation, I'm sure there's some teams who just play a lot safer as a result and won't experiment like they would have if they were, the favourite and it was game one. So what's your sense for like how it actually impacts like today's LCS in that sense, instead of the best of threes?
Obviously, this is more of an EU perspective, since I've talked to more EU people about this, but it's... Like, for example, G2 have said that they play way differently than they would have if it was a best of three. Like, they had to adapt at the beginning of the series when the meta was much more about scaling and stuff. They realized that this was way better way to approach best of one. This because scaling is much more foolproof if you screw up in the early game and stuff like this, so they didn't want to experiment as much. Whereas there are teams that experiment constantly with level ones and will remake games and scrims if their level one technique doesn't work, just to practice their level one cheese for this one best of one game that they're playing. So I think there are two different takes on that. I think it makes best of three makes probably support stuff feel a little less relevant during the course of stage games, because it's like, okay, we notice this, we can remind players and stuff about this, but we can't adapt like on the fly or between games or anything like this. So yeah, you just have to kind of, I feel like the best approach to it is to just go with what your team is more comfortable with on the day, rather than to work on stuff throughout the season. Like, it makes season adaptation a little bit harder, because you have to focus on winning that one game on the day every time. So,
well, this is something we also heard from, so like going all the way back to, I think 2016, I was interviewing Ambition, I believe, at Worlds. Like a couple, and it wasn't just him, like a couple of the Korean teams did say like, oh, we learned that we just need to play for us in the best of one, because they're obviously not used to best of ones at all. So that's something that's kind of been a constant, I guess, when you think about best of ones.
Yeah, because the other factor, I mean, funnily enough, this already does happen, like, every time we discuss best of threes in LCK, Emily, is, like, one of the problems when you're looking at someone's, like, overall record is you always have to ask, like, yeah, but when did they play, the best team, or when did they play the team that was rising up? Because, if you played them at the very beginning, maybe you got, like, an easy win, or maybe this record will level out because, your schedule means you've still got two of the top two teams to play. That becomes magnified even worse in best of one, because I'll give the best example for me right now in NA LCS is 100 Thieves, because if I had to bet on a team who I think have almost no chance of retaining their current spot, which is third, I would bet on them, because they got a lot of their big wins, especially over some of the top teams early on. And when they come back round in the cycle, I would go ahead and already put my money that, it's not that it says they're a bad team. It's just, some of those were probably upsets or one-offs, So I feel like it's an example of where, this is why it's so tough to discuss formats. It's almost never one factor. It's always how those factors all interact. And so I would actually agree. I have to bring it back to this full circle. I actually kind of agree with Riot. Like, I see why they did best of one. I think for specifically the NA audience especially, I think that is clearly the one that they actually appreciate the most. I think actually a lot of fans felt a bit disconnected, that they just wouldn't watch the series between the lesser teams, you know? Whereas even though, yes, it's not in any way the way I like to watch League of Legends, I wouldn't sit and watch a whole day of LCS all in a row. But I think actually most fans do want to do that, bizarrely. Like, they kind of do want to catch up on all the different storylines. So let's start with that then, okay? Let's jump into, we'll go right to the top of the standings. So Emily, give me your thoughts on this first, on Echo Fox. Because this is a team where, obviously, they literally are retaining that number one spot. I notice a lot of people, right? Because a lot of people were sort of hating on them early, myself included. When Cloud9 got really good, everyone was like, that's cool. It's okay that they had their time, but, Cloud9 is the real deal. That's who all the thinkers are putting their money on. But Echo Fox is still number one. So what are your thoughts on the team that leads the NA LCS, Emily?
So this past week, they had the game against TSM where everyone was kind of ripping them apart for the quote unquote arrogant Fiora draft.
Yes.
And the reason why I want to start with that game actually is because I think that not specifically because of the Fiora pick, but I think it says a lot about maybe some of the things you want to look out for as this team continues on. And it's Phoenix in the mid lane and how they play around jungle mid, because I think that people might not remember, but they actually started off quite well in that game. Phoenix was pushing in Bjergsen on Galio. They got off the top side gank that they really wanted to with Huni's Vladimir. And like it was kind of obvious they weren't going to flex those picks once they locked in the Fiora. But I think that they like talking to them afterwards, they had the idea of having the Zilean on top of the Fiora, kind of like what we saw in 2016 when we saw these like Fiora, Zilean, or like Poppy Zilean comps, where they would want to kind of dive with it, but then that never came to fruition. And I think this is kind of what you see when you see Phoenix off of maybe some of his he really just likes to sit in mid, right, and clear on stuff like Ryze, on stuff like Azir. Even on Vladimir, actually, he has a pretty good win rate with that consistently in mid, and then also when he played top.
Wasn't there a Fiora pick in another league before this? Was it LCK?
Well, who he played it.
Right, yes.
Okay.
So it was NA LCS, yes, okay.
Yeah.
But it was considered like a special for him, right?
It's a lane counter to Galio. Okay. And I so like in that way, I don't think it was like, I don't think it's as arrogant as I guess people are saying necessarily.
Well, especially since everyone always praises Phoenix's laning, right? So logically, it's not like
but I also think that once they get out of lane, it's a lot trickier just because of the play style that you kind of want Fiora to have. And it was a very weird game. I'm kind of, I guess I would say, like, not to target Phoenix because I don't think he's a bad player, but I think he's probably the one that lacks the most flexibility on that team. So going forward, I'm curious to see what they do with him, if that makes sense, especially since this team is looking like they are making playoffs, how they're going to play around a best of 5 matchup.
Okay, and by the way, just to check that, we've got the point here. When you were tying it in, you were saying about the way that they specifically play jungle and mid in that team, so not just Phoenix on his own. What was like the conclusion in that sense tied into this game?
Basically that because Phoenix is such a like dominant force in the mid, because he can hold mid, because he knows he's a very strong laner, and that's always been like his thing, right? So in this case, you'd think like, oh, they just pick a lane and counter pick and it's great. But I actually think that he just does so much better on these more like wave clear champions that have more control, zone control in team fights. Even though like Fiora obviously has the zoning ultimate, but she's a bit more of a duelist. She's a bit more of someone that I'd want to see like maybe split pushing, or even like the way who he would want to use her specifically as a lane counter pick is you push in the lane, then you go roam, which isn't really something we see a lot of out of Phoenix. And then in terms of jungle, it's more like aside from I think one match, which I'm blanking on which one it was, but Dardoch primarily will focus top side more than he will bot side.
Sure.
Mid.
And that's why
mid top. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's why. So like you're seeing him either go for a gank mid so that Phoenix can just sit in lane for the rest of the like early to mid game, right? So he's not roaming, but he gets the one gank or the one like drive by from Dardoch, and then he's totally, he's just gonna sit there. And it allows Dardoch to do a lot more topside. That's what I meant with the jungle.
So do you think they just overthought it then? Like it was just unnecessary?
Go, Kelsey.
People criticize this draft, and I don't even Fiora doesn't even come out to me as the worst part of it.
I actually think it's the Zilean.
Yeah, no, I mean for me the worst part is your TSM are first picking Galio, and Echo Fox respond with Kalista auto. Like, what is Kalista going to do when Galio decides to ult bottom lane? Die, I guess. Like that's basically what Kalista will get priority, yeah. But the thing is that, you're picking Kalista here, and then TSM responds with Braum. So you pick Kalista, TSM responds with Braum. Braum is good into Alistar, but you can still pick Kalista. Alistar should still be strong. But Braum isn't good into a lot of tanks that Kalista normally pairs with, but Braum is also good as a tank to Kalista. So this is a good pick away. But then, if you're on red side, you normally want to counterpick support in general. So Zilean is a good pick into Braum. But Zilean Kalista just feels so weird. You're ulting Zilean into the middle of a fight, theoretically, right? And then Zilean is, super squishy. And so what is Zilean going to do? Ult himself? Then, okay, your Zilean Fiora is immediately dead. I don't know. It seems, I would say that Galio is a super good pick into Echo Fox, and because they aren't necessarily going to pay that much attention to their bot lane, they'll usually pick, like you said, they'll usually pick Kalista and then have them try to get pressure on their own. So if you have Galio to counter basically any bot lane pressure, and you pick something that can still lane okay into Kalista and maybe a strong jungle, and then you can win off of bot lane pretty easily. So I would say Galio is a pretty good pick in Echo Fox, yeah.
Okay, but in the next game, they also tried the same thing. If you notice, CLG, Team Liquid rather, I just thought it was probably Team Liquid did sort of at least the top half of the map was the same as the TSM draft, right? So what would you say about the overall game there?
I think Echo Fox just did better getting general priority here. Their Sedge 1 did way more work also than the Kazakhs. Kazakhs kind of fell off overall.
Is Echo Fox a known quantity? Do you think everyone knows how to play against them now?
I feel like they play the same every game. So effectively the same every game. So I feel like you should know how to play against them by now. But knowing how isn't necessarily always the same as executing. Yes. So
yeah, this draft actually, or just the team composition that Team Liquid played into Echo Fox is still really good, right? You have the Galio, not only the Galio, but you have the Alistar for engage. You have Camille who can come in on top of all of that with a Hextech ultimatum, and dive the backline. So it's it is really good against what Echo Fox like to do. I don't think I think it was a smart team composition, despite the fact that Echo Fox obviously really closed this game out really very, very quickly after the skirmish topside.
Yeah, like you said, the top side of the map is the same, and this combo is really good. You get Galio and Camille ults, and then Kazakhs comes in and kills whoever is going to die, and that's basically it. So,
is Echo Fox a team that will? Well, what do you think the upcoming patch changes will have an effect on Echo Fox? Will it at all change the way they have to play now? Will it inhibit any aspect of their game?
There are two ways that I see this going. One is that a new patch really emphasizes like early game spikes and getting first Baron. I think that Echo Fox's Baron control is terrible and their Baron setups are awful, but they snowball so hard that they get Barons pretty easily anyway. So in theory, it should buff them, but I think the teams who play so if you play something like Cassio Cho'Gath or something against Echo Fox, you could theoretically just steal this Baron from them and win off of that. So, I mean, there are two ways that this is going, but I think it should help Echo Fox in general.
Emily, how did Echo Fox win all these games then?
I mean, they were really... I think outside of a few like what Kelsey said with Baron setups, I think they have a pretty strong understanding of how they do want to play with their players. That one like Fiora game aside, which I don't think it's arrogant, but I don't think it necessarily like the with the Zillion in there. I don't really think it fits a lot of what they might want to do. I think they know how to play through their strongest laners in Phoenix and Huni. And they've been snowballing through topside, and that's how they want to play. And that's how they have been playing. How they've set up a lot of their compositions and how they set up in game is definitely making use of the pieces that they have. So I think that's a huge part of why they're winning these games. I think to Kelsey's point, they snowball. When they snowball, they typically snowball very hard and very quickly, which means that even if they are taking what should be a disadvantageous fight at Baron because they don't set up for it correctly or they don't have their vision correctly put in place by the time they start it, it means that even when the other team gets there, sometimes they're still able to win that team fight just because they're so far ahead. So going into the latter half of the split, as we get closer to playoffs and then going into playoffs, like the things that they really need to look at are definitely like neutral objective control, especially since that first Baron is going to be super, super important. And that's been a constant like throughout the
exactly. Isn't this an issue though? Is like okay, if you were to give like a scouting report like that all sounds great, but if this team has been winning all these games and presumably in scrims they do well, and every player in the team seems like he likes the way things are going and they've got all the success. It's not like they haven't ever tried to improve in this sense, right? There's probably some sort of disconnect, or they just don't have the shot calling set up to make it work. What would be some possible reasons as to why they're having these issues, despite being such a good team?
Or they're not being punished for it. I mean, that's the other thing you could also bring up. Like possibly they're not being punished for it enough. So you either don't recognize the behavior or like you do and you try to work on it, but at the same time, like even if you mess it up, you're still not getting punished. So
it's also sometimes difficult to give feedback based on theoreticals. And this is something that a lot of top teams have expressed, is that it's like super hard to improve when you're at the top of your region, because if you're pointing out something that it's like, well, that didn't cause us to fuck up there. And it's just like, well, this could have happened, or this may have happened. And they said, well, this wasn't relevant to this review or this game, so let's move on, right? So it's sometimes hard to convey that information when it's like, okay, well, we screwed up here and we died for it and we lost this for it. So how do we work on that versus, okay, well, we won this Baron fight anyway, even though you're saying the vision was bad. So this is clearly not as big of an issue as this problem. So stuff like that.
It's actually funny that still exists in League of Legends, because if you've actually ever watched any documentaries about like the best coaches of all time in any big traditional sport, funnily enough, the coaches who have the best record in the league are the hardest on their players, because basically what they do is, the reason they have the best record is when they start to see like a problem start to appear, they cut it off before it becomes an actual problem that makes you lose the game, you know. And obviously, I mean, admittedly, it's definitely not as simple as getting players to buy in like that. Usually these are, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. These are legendary coaches already. They already have the rep for being the guy who's very harsh on your players. And the one detail I'll add in, which unfortunately I can think of almost no Western coach in League of Legends who has this, is they have like mad credit, basically. As in, like, they used to be a legendary player, or they used to be a coach 10 years before now and they were the best. So, from day one, you get that guy through the door and he knows, I've got to listen to this guy, obviously. Whereas admittedly, we've mentioned this many times before, coaching in the West is pretty much like a negotiation process of like, how much can I get you to do what I'd like you to do? And how much will you just not listen to what I've said? So, okay, let me ask the tough question then. Emily, as of right now, Echo Fox is definitely going to be a playoff team. Doesn't matter how bad it goes. But they also could keep winning loads of games. Maybe they just don't have to ever address these problems. When they get to the playoffs, can they win?
I kind of want to say yes because I like this team actually. Like they're a fun team to watch. Like they're aggressive, they're aggressive. They have mechanically skilled players. I really enjoy how they play around topside early. And how they play around Phoenix and then how they play around Huni. I think it suits their team really well. I think going into playoffs, I know a lot of people have made the Immortals comparison, right? Between how Immortals kind of like, they stomped through the regular season and then they had struggles when they went into playoffs. And so that's actually when I'm not looking at Huni, even though I think people are going to automatically look to Huni because of the history there. But I actually am going to look at Phoenix and how they're going to play around Phoenix. And if teams attack the mid lane very aggressively, how Echo Fox is going to respond to that. And I think that is where in playoffs we'll like really see the depth of this team. If a team is able to pressure their mid and push their mid, that's when they're really, really going to be put to the test.
But new patch buffed his champions. It didn't nerf his already overpowered champions. New buff actually buffed Phoenix's already ridiculously overpowered champions with API optimization.
So Kelsey, this is a different rewording of the initial question at the start of the episode, which is to a casual fan, well, if you can win all these best of ones, why can't you just win 3 of them in a row and win the best of 5, right? So will there be a difference, do you suspect, when we come to the playoffs for this team?
I mean, it really depends because like the big fundamental difference between playoffs and regular season is, and you have an entire week to prepare for one opponent.
Yes.
And theoretically, throughout the course of playoffs, patches don't change, right?
Yes.
Also, so you aren't learning new stuff throughout this part. I mean, it's been true for the past is that there'll be a new patch for playoffs and it'll be the same patch throughout. And then also you get rewarded for adaptation between games a lot more in playoffs. So it really depends on how well they're able to use their prep between scrim time and how well they're practicing that. Also depends a lot on, I don't know. You can fill in all of the gaps. I don't have to bore you. But the thing is that to me, I don't auto see this team collapsing, but I see that there are very specific ways to play around that teams are already finding. There are answers to how TSM should have won the first game against Echo Fox, for example. This because the problem wasn't their approach to playing against Tsenkov Fox or anything like this. Their problem was how they were setting up their base sieges. That was the problem. And if they set up their base sieges better this game, I still think TSM's base sieges need work, but they set them up way better this game than the previous game against Echo Fox. So you're also looking at what opponents are they facing in playoffs, and it's going to be like the top 6 teams as opposed to the entire pool. So these teams will have had the entire season to study Echo Fox. They'll have the entire season to study games where teams are winning, and the question is whether or not Echo Fox have the ability to adapt. So far, I don't really see a team that has kind of changed at all the entire season. So that is my concern.
Okay, right. Here's the potentially loaded question. So in this team, is Dardoch the best jungler in the NA LCS?
People are going to flame me, but I actually think Meteos is the best right now.
Because, I mean, obviously, people are going to say, well, he's won all these games that look great, his team's got the best record. But, as basically Emily outlined, they play through top. They have arguably the best LCS player ever, plays in the top lane and just always does well. Phoenix obviously does well in lane. He's got a bot lane that does not require massive amounts of attention. It's pretty much the dream setup if you're Dardoch, as far as I can tell, right?
I mean, I think Dardoch is really good because he's doing what his team needs him to win. So that's important, right? And he's doing it very well.
So what separates Meteos for you from him then?
Maybe the thing is, I think that, for example, you see in the TSM game, I would say that required variation in how Dardoch was approaching the game. If they're attacking bottom lane that hard, he's still doing the same kind of like focus mid to top sort of setup. And that's how he's going to approach it. But he's not necessarily trading sides as well or anything of that nature. Whereas I feel like Meteos and the way that he's played, this could change with the patch because I feel like one of Meteos' greatest strengths is backing before the enemy jungle and making sure he's getting down vision with Tracker's Knife before enemy jungle, which gives the team a major tempo advantage. So that could be bad on the new patch because obviously you're not getting that. But the other thing is that Meteos, like the way he played against Cloud9 was really, really good this week. Like he identified how Cloud9 win, probably with support of support staff or whatever, but he identified how Cloud9 win, which was that Jensen almost always has priority on first back, and he made sure he delayed Jensen's first back. And then the way he's jungling is different every game, depending on the team composition of the enemy team and then what the win conditions are of the enemy team. And so I think that this, like, he delayed back and then he used Skrunner very well to get ball lane at advantage the way Skrunner is supposed to. So to me, Meteos right now is jungling the best of any jungler in the LCS. So even though 100 Thieves suck.
Yes, absolutely. As I outlined at the beginning of the show also. Okay, Emily, what's your take on this? Who's the best jungler in the LCS?
I like the way, so it's really hard to separate. I think Meteos is really good. I actually really like, and again, it's really hard to separate this because, to Kelsey's point, Jensen is, the way he communicates with junglers from the beginning of last year, so like spring 2017 to now, is like night and day. It's really impressive how much he is grown as a player and throughout like that time period. I don't know if it's because Contracts was kind of a brand new jungler, so you know they both had to like get used to each other, and there were a lot of really weird invades last year where they obviously weren't syncing up together. But this year with Svenskeren, I feel like the two of them work really, really well together. And outside, are
you building into saying Svenskeren is the best jungler in the LCS? Is that where you're going with this?
I think he's better than people give him credit for.
He's always been better than people give him credit for.
Yeah.
I feel like he's the same jungler he was on TSM. So unless you're arguing that he was the best jungler on TSM, I might have to pick up on here.
Fair.
But yeah.
I don't know. I think you have to. I feel like he's not getting enough credit. If that makes sense.
See, we've spooked her. She's walked it back now.
I know.
Now she's just turned it into like, I just want him to get some credit. And yeah,
I'm trying to think of who else. There's Meteos. There's Dardoch.
What do you feel about Smithy and Rainover, who I feel like were insanely well credited and given plenty of accolades for?
Yeah, what about Smithy?
Wait, Rainover gets a lot of accolades? I thought he's been shit on lately.
He's been shit on lately, but before this season, I'm talking about before this season, like these guys are hyped as some of the best junglers. So,
for Xmithy, I actually still really like Xmithy. But I also think, to your point about Svenskeren, I think he again is very similar to how he's always played. Mm-hmm. With the Rainover, I don't even know what's going on.
I feel like
See, here's the thing. He is obviously your kryptonite, Emily, because you've had to learn that pathing actually isn't everything in the game. There's more to playing even jungle than that, believe it or not,
Yeah, I was really looking forward to seeing Huhi and Rainover together because I've always respected Huhi's map awareness when it comes to side lanes. And I was looking to see how he would go together with the jungler like Rainover.
Could have been interesting, right?
Very smart early pathing.
Yes.
And it just has not whatever is going on. It just hasn't worked out, despite the fact that they have sometimes had some really interesting and strong early games.
Rainover in CLG. He's like one of those old-fashioned murder mystery movies where what happens is a detective goes around and everyone he talks to gets killed in the next scene. When he goes back, they've been murdered. It's like every time he went there, it's like, oh, what's going on here, miss? And they finds out, and he comes like, oh, she's dead. What the hell? And they were just being followed the whole time. That's it. That's how it ends. And it was whoever would talk to him at the beginning. So I don't know who that would be in this context. Hotshot, I guess, is just kill them all. Right. let's rein it back in then. Since we mentioned Svenskeren and you invoked his name, Cloud9 is obviously the team that's right next to Echo Fox. They're the one where, as I referenced before, you're sort of allowed to say you think Cloud9 could be the best team in the LCS because they have the good record, they have all these good players, looks like they've improved over some of the past problems from last year. What do you think of Cloud9, Emily?
I like them. I think Smoothie is finally getting his due, I guess.
You're all about people getting their just desserts.
I know.
It's not some sort of insecurity of your own. It's what's going on here?
Smoothie, I think, third last year in MVP voting, and everyone was like, "What are you doing?"
Bold, yeah.
So I think the way he has roamed, especially in terms of, so they obviously have a new top laner, right? And Licorice is very good, but he's new. So there's just a lot of things that he hasn't grown into or just lacks experience in. And I think C9 have done a phenomenal job at playing around that, and either getting him really strong matchups, sending Smoothie to roam around the map to apply pressure, Svenskeren applying pressure topside. Obviously, Jensen has held this kind of stranglehold on mid where he's just so good about his back timings and when he leaves to roam. So I think C9 have played really, really well around the team that they have, and they're just very smart about the way they've approached the game this year.
So Kelsey, here's the problem. I was with her the entire way there. I was loving it. She's preaching to the choir. I think C9's probably the best. But they did lose to the aforementioned 100 Thieves, who, again, we have not said yet so far, what a good team. They're on the rise, probably going to win the LCS. So what happened? What's going wrong for Cloud9?
So I got called out this week for not being specific enough with my criticisms of Cloud9 in the last episode that we did on NA. So I made a point of doing an article on the Cloud9 versus 100 Thieves game where I pointed out how 100 Thieves highlighted Cloud9's flaws very well. Okay. And one thing is that I believe they're very reliant on Jensen getting first back. And what I mean is Jensen will almost always have a better first item buy than the enemy team. So he will back first in lane. So mid lane will be playing against each other. Jensen will be able to push out, and with being able to push out, he will back. He will buy an item. He will come back to the lane, and the other mid laner is like, oh, fuck. If Jensen comes back to lane with an item and I don't have an item, I get dicked really hard. So he backs, he gets an item. But Jensen comes back to lane, he pushes out the wave, and he's like, oh, mid laner isn't here. I have all of this tempo. I have all of this map control. I can leave lane and do shit now.
Yes.
So he leaves lane, he goes top, he ganks for Licorice. Licorice gets super ahead. Jensen comes back to lane. Other mid laner has just pushed his wave to his turret. He's like, thank you very much. This is delicious farm. And then the game proceeds in this fashion over and over again. But
how does that work? Doesn't the enemy jungler ever notice? Wait a minute, my mid lane is gone. I think Jensen went a minute ago. Maybe I'll... Nah, never mind.
I mean, if enemy jungler goes up to match, then unless like his top laner is under turret and they can make it like 2v3 with jungler, top, and turret versus top, mid, and jungler, then obviously jungler top mid will win jungler top because there's no mid laner, right?
Yes.
So what Meteos did was he was like, you know what? I got this shit. I got Skarner. Skarner is an OP champion, which you don't understand right away, but the reason why Skarner is OP is because he clears faster than every other jungler, okay?
Right.
Which means that he'll be doing full clear, enemy jungler will be doing full clear, and he'll be like a camp ahead, and he'll say, oh, I just cleared this camp. I have all of this time to do shit before the enemy jungler will be able to finish his clear and back, right? Or I can force the enemy jungler to go like one camp less and back to match my back, and then he'll be behind. So when Skarner does the full clear or clears all of his jungler like this really fast, and he's like, I could back and get wards before enemy jungler, or I could make sure that Jensen doesn't get first back. So what he does is he goes mid after he finishes clear, and then he just like threatens to gank. So Jensen has to play back. His mid laner gets to push up. Like Ryu gets to push up, and then Ryu gets to back before Jensen. And then Ryu has priority. Jensen can't do his roam, and then Skarner continues to farm until he's 6, ganks bot, and then bot gets the advantage instead of top. Like his bot gets the advantage, whereas enemy top is unable to like get the advantage off of mid having as much priority because every time Skarner has like a free camp moment, he goes and he's like fucking around with mid and Jensen. So I thought this was very good. And I think this is a problem that C9 have to find other ways to get advantages early if they're going to play like these early game comps with lane winning top laners. So, yeah.
Okay, right. So in the end, it circles back into that they're playing around having a good matchup for top.
Yeah, or having a good matchup for mid. In this case, is like the mechanism by which they help their top laner with a good matchup. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then yada yada yada, Varus gets 11 kills.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Right, Emily, despite these problems, right, okay, how about this then? Is this something where Cloud9 has more variety than that? They just haven't had to show it yet because they haven't lost that many games?
I mean, I think we're going to see moving forward because I don't think C9 is the type of team who won't look at this, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know. I think C9 are smart in terms of how they play around the players that they have. So I do think that one thing that was also interesting, Kelsey kind of touched upon it, but the fact that Meteos went bot when he was level 6 and Aphromoo is on an initiating support of Thresh. And so I think another thing that C9 is probably going to have to look at is, like I said, not only unlocking Jensen from the mid to roam for top is super important, but they've also even had, like, I remember when Clutch Gaming tried to do, like, Lyra tried to do this invade where C9 then, I believe, descended on him at red buff when he was playing Gragas, I believe. And that involved Smoothie going topside because they recognized where Lyra was going to be. I do think that even though it's not necessarily a huge visible priority for C9, I do also think that if you can get advantages in the bot lane and lock Smoothie into lane, it does affect the rest of the map as well for C9. So if more teams try to do that, I also think that could be an issue that will hamper them going forward.
Yeah, actually, also, if you look at 100 Thieves' draft plan, not to bore people with this, but if you look at their support bans, like Smoothie has only played tank support so far in the LCS. And they ban Alistair right away, which I would say is Cloud9's like best support champion that they play. And then they go into second bans and they ban Braum and Tom Kench. And literally the only other support C9 has played is Tarek. And they're like, okay, this is fine. So, yeah.
Okay. So then let's answer the other side of the equation then. So 100 Thieves, Kelsey.
Yep.
Bearing in mind, they won both their games. They beat the aforementioned team we mentioned and FlyQuest. Why is 100 Thieves not a good team? You just said maybe they have the best jungler. I mean, you hear all this praise in all the interviews. Aframu, Meteos, they're doing such a good job. What's the problem with 100 Thieves?
So I think that they had a very good game plan against Cloud9. I mean, they've kind of had good game plans. I remember last time we talked about the Golden Guardians versus 100 Thieves game, and it was kind of an issue. Like, Mark said the contracts carried the game, but I felt like Meteos gave the team so much tempo that they just didn't take, and it felt like they are afraid to fight perpetually, right? And I don't, like, I think that part of it was just having more engage in some of these games. That was helpful. Aframu willing to pick, like, the Blitzcrank against FlyQuest, the Thresh. I think that's helpful. They were able to use the jungle priority finally. I think FlyQuest's draft, like, not to meme the Rapid Star situation, was hilarious. Not because I think it's bad. Okay, I actually don't mind their drafts too much, because I think that their comp makes sense, like, holistically. It just kind of almost disregards the enemy comp entirely, and they were really bad at executing it. So
obviously what we should do anyway is just go back in time, like 2 years or whatever, and then just give Rapid Star a Snickers and go, Rapid Star, you're being a little bitch, man. Take this. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember when I was just a cool Korean guy who used to play mid lane and have a great personality. Yeah, thanks for that, Snickers. See, I'm even fucking shouting out your sponsors, FlyQuest. I mean, I did straight dick you fucking coach to do it, but fair, for everything there is a price, as we've all learned. Okay, so then explain this then, Kelsey. So if someone hears, okay, Aframu's sort of resurrected his career a bit, Meteos is playing well, Cody's son's getting 20 kills in a week, they've got Someday, one of the most universally hailed Western imports to NA LCS. What's the flaw with the team? What's the glaring holes? Because, I mean, I have to say, despite all these good things we've said, I do think they're going to go downhill.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just what we highlighted at the start of the split is just maybe you get to a point where they aren't necessarily motivated to fill in the gaps. Like, I feel like there's a very specific type of mid lane champion on which Ryu succeeds right now. And he was allowed to play Ryze. I think they got their preferred side lane setup with Ryze and R against FlyQuest. That's how they've been doing well most, is when they can 1-3-1 with these champions. And then, of course, like Cody on a hypercarry, I think that they do have a very specific team comp that they like. And in some ways, they're as confined as FlyQuest themselves and the types of team comps that they can play regarding their mid laner. So, like, those are some of the problems with 100 Thieves, sure. I think that the fact that they're giving Aframu more agency and more engage is a good sign, because when they put him on stuff like Tark, it just seemed really flat. Like, they had setup, they had tempo, they had ways to win, they just kind of did nothing. So I want to see if this is like the missing element that allows them to change, but in terms of developing with players like Ryu, I'm still on the fence in terms of whether or not he'll expand his pool or something like this.
Emily, 100 Thieves, what do you think?
I really like Aframu. Because this is like the stupid CLG meme, right? Where it's like Aframu on engage supports. But I think looking at this team, you had, for whatever reason, a lot of veteran players, but they seemed, especially in a few like of their longer, more drawn out games, they would seem like they were looking for like the perfect fight, and they would let a lot of opportunities slip by where they could have engaged and won, I think. And so when Afromu plays something that's like a Blitzcrank or a Thresh,
Yes.
and you have Meteos in this game, he was on Jax, but previously on Skarner, who, you want that fast early clear, you want those early ganks, you want to force people out of their build patterns so that they have to build a QSS and delay damage, that it makes the team look a lot more decisive. And that's kind of what they've needed for the past few weeks. And I don't know if it's because, again, they just have a lot of veteran voices who are all like, no, we can wait. We can be patient. We can choose our fight. We can choose our moment. I don't know if that's what was going on, but looking at the players on this team, I can definitely see that being a thing that could happen. And I like the fact that they chose Afro as this primary initiator, where he's okay, we go now, and the rest of the team follows up. I liked that a lot.
Okay. Right. Let's just keep moving down the standings. So, inexplicably, Twch Gaming is actually winning quite a few games. In fact, they're tied with the much vaunted Team Liquid. So how are they doing this? How are they getting away with it?
But you don't understand, Thorin. They have a statistical method that allowed them to secure the most optimal players to sign.
Yes, exactly.
That's clearly how they are winning these games.
Well, problem solved then, yeah. Basically, for $100,000 buy-in, I can get access to this program and regular updates. So I will obviously be saving all my money in doing that.
There you go.
Have they actually started to come together as a real team?
I think the difference between 100 Thieves before and 100 Thieves now is that they actually do feel like they've gotten some control.
You mean Twch Gaming, right?
Yeah, excuse me.
Yes, I'm just checking.
They both have weird red logos. They're in a similar place on the standings.
They're both just people spend a lot of money. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. The difference between Twch Gaming now and Twch Gaming before is that I do feel like they feel a little bit more holistic in terms of their early game plan, and it's not Lyra invading against priority or their bot lane ending it and causing them to lose advantage, and then they have to play from behind, and so they're able to translate some of this teamwork into the earlier phases of the game. They also got a lot off of being on the Skarner train and really early on. So that was useful to them in terms of gaining momentum last week, or the week before, excuse me. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that it then? Are they going to go downhill?
I don't know if they'll go downhill. They seem to be on the uptick, I would say. They just don't... their roster doesn't jump out at you as a team that will win LCS, but they feel like they aren't necessarily plateauing either, if that makes sense. I feel like they're actually developing pretty well. So, they could make they could stay top 3, probably.
Okay. What do you think, Emily? I actually think where they are right now is absolutely fine. If you could stay anywhere near here, I expected them to be mid-table anyway.
Yeah. So this is one of the teams that I was I liked the core that they kept together with Apollo, Hakuho, and Lyra. And even though obviously Lyra has not been anywhere near what he was last split, I think that tied for third is a pretty good place for this team. They've kind of, them and to some extent 100 Thieves have kind of risen above the rest of the newer rosters. And I think they play really well around, again, mid priority with Febivin. So, I think in terms of the standings, they're right where they should be. Even though I know a lot of people have been really hesitant to give them credit, especially after for example, the TSM game, the first TSM game, not the second one. like I can totally understand where you look at some of their wins and you'd be like, these are a little, but like you can say the same thing. For example, Echo Fox has some of those wins as well, right? So, and no one's kind of holding it against them at this point. So I think Clutch, in terms of where they're at in the standings, is at like a perfectly respectable position, and I don't feel like they're like in a position where it's like, oh, their standing doesn't reflect what this team actually is, if that makes sense.
Okay. Do you actually see is there a possibility to go further though? Can they encroach upon the top teams?
Go ahead.
Go first.
I was just going to say that I think in terms of development, I'm seeing some of the most improvement out of this team. And for me, that's always a better sign than teams that stay the same when you head into playoffs, because it means that they're able to kind of either adapt over time or adapt in a situation if there's something they need to correct. They seem to have a pretty good read on the meta in general. I think so. It's weird because they had an insanely good draft against TSM in that second game, right? Where they got like the Skarner and then they got Camille, Zaira Khan, and it's just ridiculous snowball from that. And then meanwhile, you look at their Cloud9 draft and we left jungle the second phase and had to pick Lee Sin. Okay. It was, I think giving Lyra junglers that can get farming priority is good because it's better to have him have tempo instead of doing like these weird desperate invades he's been doing. And I think part of the issue is that he just feels more confident when he has a jungler that clears faster. And yeah, I don't know. So for me, that's a big improvement. I'm not really sure exactly what happened in the draft against C9, but it seems pretty terrible in general. So, yeah.
Okay. Right, let's talk about TSM then. Because the thing with TSM is, they actually remind me a bit of, it's funny, the mirror between the two teams is ridiculous. What's going on with SK Telecom and LCK? Because every time they win a good game, like against a good team, you're like, oh, they're back. But then they're never quite back, because then they'll have a game afterwards. Like, still a lot of problems there. So, are we at a similar point? Have they at least stabilized? Because I've noticed, okay, yes, great, you beat Echo Fox, great, good job. Okay, you lost to Cloud9, that was fine. Cloud9's very good. But they basically only get the wins generally against the bottom teams aside from this one Echo Fox game. So whereabouts is TSM as a squad? Emily, you go first on this one. You step into the minefield of TSM.
I mean, I'm not as because you made the SK Telecom comparison, I'm not as.
I'm trying to bait you into this one. Oh, they'll be great.
Yeah, I'm not as sold on TSM as I am on SKT. And as you know from our more recent episode, I wasn't even as sold on SKT as a lot of people are. So
that's one way to let people down gently.
Like go through like 3 levels.
I know,
yeah.
I think that's like Emily's code for she doesn't think TSM is very good.
I'm curious to see them on the new patch. I think, did they pick? Yeah, they're still on the Ezreal train, which I think is interesting.
I am a big fan of the Ezreal train right now. Just throwing that out there. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I want to say that they're improving. I think you've slowly seen like the first few weeks of Mike Young compared to the past week of Mike Young. There's obviously a visible improvement. I'm not really sure what was going on initially in terms of him communicating with his lanes and just generally kind of seeming, I guess, out of sync with the team in general, like, and very hesitant to do anything. And then when he did try to do something, it wouldn't have like the rest of the team behind him, or he just wouldn't have vision. So I think that has improved a bit in the more recent weeks. again, Sven and Mithy, I think a lot of TSM's issues were weird communication errors, and also like you would see it when they would try to close out games, like when they're trying to siege the base, or when they're trying to set up for specific things, the entire team just wouldn't be on the same page, and it would end up in these really awkward losses, like the Echo Fox loss, their first time they played Echo Fox. And I think that has improved. So I don't know if it was just that this team took that long to start communicating with each other well, because some of those things just come with like time as a team. I know Kelsey said she made a comment on Twitter that I kind of wanted to hear more in depth. So forgive me if you've already done this. Yeah, like they picked up G2's. It's like they kept the TSM problems, but then they picked up G2's problems.
Yeah. And
so can you expand on that?
I didn't really understand why people liked that tweet so much. I think they felt like it was because I was flaming the players or something. Like I was saying that the players that TSM kept were the bad players.
I think they just thought you were memeing, to be honest.
G2. I mean, I just feel like some of their approaches to the game, like TSM's coordination with jungler has generally been pretty bad around mid lane. So that's a problem that I feel like they've retained, and I think that that's still true. It's just that they've discovered that if they give mid lane bot lane priority, like bot lane is way better at backing up Mike Young than mid. Even in some of the bad games TSM played, I almost feel like Mithy has been more willing to die to help Mike Young than what Bjergsen does, which is like, oh, I have priority, but I'm going to make sure I keep this guy under tower, and then jungler is going to kill you, and it's fine, whatever. So I think that that's kind of part of the situation. In terms of G2, also I feel like TSM's base sieges were really bad. Like, remember actually the MSI game against G2, where they were really bad at coordinating waves across lanes to crash at the same time against the enemy base. And that's something that people have highlighted, and it's a problem that I feel like they've retained. And then meanwhile, G2, I think some of their issues were in regards to not necessarily being able to use bot lane leads effectively, as well as maybe not necessarily like when their mid is pushed out, not necessarily backing up mid as much. So just a lot of problems related to mid lane and jungle synergy that I felt like both teams have had. Mid to late, G2's lane assignments have always been kind of weird. Like, I think I was specifically memeing the situation where it was the clutch game, where Sven is top, and then everyone top against no one to defend something. I don't remember. And then everyone goes top 2, and mid is just open, and clutch are like, okay, we have Rift Herald, this is fun. And I was just really confused by this moment, but it reminded me of when like G2 were always vulnerable because they really liked to send Sven as sideline even after the top side lane, even after the game had been blown open, right? Even after they had like all first tiers down, and even with if enemy dual lane was mid, like Sven would sometimes be top. It wasn't as severe as in the Fnatic case, but this would be a situation that I felt made G2 a little bit vulnerable. So like I felt like this iteration of TSM, as much as even a week ago, has had a ton of problems from both G2 and TSM from last year. So that's kind of why I made that tweet.
When you said earlier, then, in that explanation, like you not only referred to TSM's, obviously, I mean, you've addressed it many times, their issues integrating the jungler, but then you also did refer to, even when Bjergsen has priority, he's not really doing anything with it. Bjergsen has been there for a lot of the TSM jungler issues. Do you think it's reasonable to say, I mean, you've essentially said as much in your pieces, he's part of the problem, right? He's not necessarily the problem, but he's clearly part of the problem, right?
Yeah, I'm not really sure where it comes from. I think it's part of a mentality where it's, if I have priority, jungler should be able to do something, right? So if I have lane pushed out and enemy mid lane detained, jungler should be able to do something. So I previously kind of explained the Jensen situation, so it's a good in terms of how Jensen is performing right now, and I think this is a good way to set this up, is like when Jensen has priority and he knows the mid lane is going to take a long time to answer, or the mid lane still has to push back the wave before he can even do anything or match, Jensen understands like what he can do with this time frame. He understands that like whatever mid lane takes 30 seconds to get back to lane after he backs or whatever, and he knows that the kinds of stuff he can do in that frame. Whereas I feel like Bjergsen isn't quite as on point with using those time frames, and he's almost afraid to do something and lose a wave for it if he leaves lane, or he's afraid of mid laner matching or not knowing when mid laner match. It almost feels like this is a problem that they're having. So he won't do stuff as much with jungler as much as he is, I think, probably in his mind enabling his jungler, which may not always be enough if like enemy top has priority or enemy bot has priority or something like this. So
okay. Emily, is there anything that stands out? Like, does TSM have a clear strength? Do they have like a clear win condition in all these games they play? Do you think they have any element of their identity in that sense?
No.
They've got all these fabulous players, obviously, haven't they? So you'd think there'd be something you could do.
Not yet, but I also don't, like, in fairness, I don't think a lot of North American teams have like a very clear-cut identity outside of Echo Fox and C9. So that's not even a slight against TSM.
Okay. Let's do a quick sidebar.
Sure.
Okay, this is going to be a sidebar that you can definitely tie it into any teams in any regions that you think are good examples. But I want to do an abstract for a second, which is, this is something maybe if you only watch one league this year, you might not have noticed this. But in every single league around the world at the moment, the parity is utterly ridiculous. I mean, the Korean one's the most extreme example, because you have teams that have played, like Rox Tigers, a team with 0 star names, can win as many games almost as like fucking KSV, a team with the reigning world champions with exactly the same lineup. But it goes in every single league. EU LCS, obviously, we had all the bad teams that won the first 3 weeks, and the good teams won fuck all. NA LCS now, we have these teams in the middle who some people thought they would be near the bottom. We have teams that were supposed to be in the middle who are top of the league. Is there something about the last few patches, the current meta, how they changed between the seasons? What would account for essentially how messy league is right now? I mean, there's almost no teams, if you get outside of amazingly LPL, that actually look like every week they could play the same way and win.
Major roster changes, I guess.
Do you think that's a big factor?
Yeah, I think
not many lineups stayed together.
Yeah, because last year you had TSM retaining most of their lineup, G2 retaining most of their lineup. And
we had a lot of cores for sure that had been together for years, right?
Yeah. So they kind of kept momentum, and it's like, okay, we can sort of, like, there were some shaky moments in the beginnings of seasons and stuff.
Has this been a harder meta to figure out, though?
This meta, I wouldn't say it's necessarily been harder to figure out. I would say that this meta has been more forgiving, kind of mistakes through 8.3 at least. It's been way more forgiving of mistakes early on in the early game, so there may be something to that. Whereas you can kind of get away with like screwing up your laning phase way more, with dying early way more. Whereas like 8.4, I don't think that will be the case as much. So
okay, do you have anything on this, Emily?
So I think it's completely different for Korea than it is for North America. For North America, I honestly just think, and I hate to keep like bringing this up, but it's this weird stew of a ton of new rosters where even if the players have maybe like 2 players have played together or 3 players have played together for a while, they're adding new players, even if they're imports that have been in NA for a couple of years. It's still like all of these brand new rosters, and it just takes time. And so like all of these teams, especially in best of 1 setups, which is already very volatile, that, you know, there are going to be these weeks that seem like huge upset weeks, because you have teams that will come in with a specific game plan for that one team, or they will have figured out one thing in the past week and then they kind of leapfrog over another hybrid roster that maybe had leapfrogged over another team in the previous week. I think with Korea, a lot of it has to do with just, to Kelsey's point, the patches themselves and how Korean teams a lot of the time will play the safest way possible to try to capitalize on opponents' mistakes. Or like in the case of the Rocks Tigers, they have come up with a method, especially in certain games around Unsealed Spellbook, of how to play around the players that they specifically have, which means that until you get to like the very top, so like we're not saying, Rocks Tigers aren't gonna like break into the top like 3.
Seems pretty unlikely.
Are we?
I mean, I would hope not, but just based on who is top 3 right now, but who knows? Anything's possible, and maybe, at the end of the split someday.
I don't know if anything's possible. Some things are possible.
People can come back to me and be like, you said the Rocks Tigers weren't going to make it, and they finished second. And I'll be pleasantly surprised. But I think when you have a team, or when you have a meta that is, where you can sit back and kind of focus on punishing an opponent's mistakes, sometimes there will be a lot of parity in Korea because of the way that teams will like default to playing.
Okay. Right, here's a less political question. Emily, is Hauntzer the best player on TSM?
The less political question?
I would still say no, individual player.
Yeah, why not? Doesn't feel to me when I watch their games as though he's one of the bigger problems. Seems like he does pretty well most games. Does nowadays actually?
I mean, I don't think he's a problem. But in terms of like raw mechanical players,
no, just the best right now. Not like the best if it was fucking Space Jam and he had to play the aliens and it was 2013 grilled interview. No,
so like right now. So is he like the best performing player on the team? Yes, I would say. Yeah, he is.
Okay, what do you think, Emily?
Oh, you mean Kelsey?
Kelsey, yes. Yes.
This is the second time.
I knew that was going to happen at least once.
Okay. At least this time you're around, so it's more understandable.
Yeah,
it's less disturbing now, isn't it? I actually do miss it. Honest.
I think, I don't even know if it's an individual performance thing, because I wouldn't necessarily say that the players are individually performing bad. I just think that there's a lot of strategical issues that they're having. So I don't know if do I think Hauntzer is performing better than, say, Sven or Bjergsen? I don't know, man.
What about this then? So when I saw that they were having all these losses in TSM, and I saw what the champion pool is like in NA right now, why does Mithy pretty much almost never get to play Alistair? Shouldn't that be right up his alley? And I went and looked at the games, and he's very rarely ever being banned. Like, I understand they themselves banned Tarmkich, so I understand why he's not getting that, but why is he not playing Alistair?
I always think his Braum is, like, his best champ, but...
So it's just available, so he just takes what his comfort pick is?
Yeah, I would say Braum is also really safe. It's weird, because even when they have red side, they very rarely counterpick support, which I feel like is super in meta right now, is counterpicking support on red side. So... Whereas Braum is a really safe champion to blind, generally speaking. Like, you might lose lane or get pushed in, and there are some mage supports that they can play, but theoretically, Braum still has really annoying level 1 if you want to set up some kind of level 1 thing or something like this. So Braum is generally a pretty good champion to blind. I think a lot of teams think this. So, yeah, if you're blinding support like Tarek, Braum, sure.
Okay, because I mean, we've discussed on past episodes, there's so much diversity at the support position. Why does TSM not use that? They just prefer that Mithy's basically the coverall. He'll just play one of these, take that early, and then we'll just do something else with the picks later. Yeah,
they seem to prefer to counterpick other roles. I don't know why. It's weird because sometimes they saved like last pick for AD once, and it seems like a really bad role to counterpick. Yeah, they've last picked Tristana like a couple of times now. It's really weird. I don't know. But go for it, I guess, if that's... I'm sure they have a reason for it. Tristana seems like a champion you can just blind anyway, but yeah.
Right, here's the question then. Where does TSM go from here? Like, do they win more and more games as the split closes out and then become a threat in the playoffs? Because as it looks right now, I can't really find any way to get hyped about them. I know already, like, here's the warning sign for me, Kelsey. I've already seen in interviews them trying to claim that, like, this is just like that one really bad split we had in, like, Season 6 spring, where it was going so badly, but then, we turned it around and we almost won the chaps. Like, if you're reaching that far into the fucking narrative bag, the swamp of narratives, to be like, here's something vaguely like when we were sort of shit, it's like, if I heard someone say that to me in an interview, I'd go, well, you do remember what your excuse was then, that your coach was total shit, you had no sort of like cohesion, and your support player was inting. So where are those now? Which ones of those would you like to now follow on and connect together to explain why things got? Because remember, they're not throwing anyone under the bus, so I'm not buying that myself. That it's all turning around at the end of the split, really.
If you look at their who they have left to play, it's FlyQuest, 100 Thieves, TL. They do have week 8.
Like week 8 is
TL, C9, so that's going to be big. But then their their final week are they play Golden Guardians and they play CLG as the last match of the split. So I think based on their recent performance, they do, there's a pretty strong chance that they will have a winning record to end the split outside of that week 8 is going to be tough for them.
Week 8 will be the most interesting to watch. I think they did look better this week. I feel like they had a better read on their pick and priorities this week than they have had. So that was a good sign. But otherwise, at least they aren't last picking AD right now. So.
There's the positive E that we all could rely on.
No, I mean, they played, like I said, I thought their base sieges were better than the games they closed out, which was my biggest issue with them in previous weeks, was how they were setting up base sieges in terms of waves crashing together. Thought that was much better this week. So they have a trajectory to follow. They could do better. I think week 8 will probably be more interesting than Emily thinks it will be. Emily sounds like she thinks they just lose. I don't know. Maybe she doesn't.
Well, TL is going to be... That is the most interesting game to me, is the TSM TL game. I'm really, really curious
about. But I think they can definitely make things interesting against Cloud9 too. So...
Okay, well let's talk about the very team you mentioned there, Team Liquid, because this was the team that understandably had massive hype around them at the beginning of the split, for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the split, and every time they get to near the boiling point to get the hype back, they lose a game. So obviously the Golden Guardians one, okay, that's pretty inexplicable, but now they've lost Echo Fox. What's going on and wrong with Team Liquid, Kelsey?
I don't know. I just think they're about as I expected them to be. They aren't.
They're surely worse than you expected them to be. Come on.
I mean, I thought they'd be 4 or 5, top 4 or 5. You didn't, on that episode, the preseason episode we did, you never asked me my thoughts on Team Liquid, but all of our guests were like, yeah, they're going to be the best team ever. I was like, okay, sure, whatever.
I mean, listen, I'm not about to get into any sort of a prolonged argument here, but I've never had to ask you your thoughts for a lot of things before that you've then given me your thoughts.
I didn't necessarily interject.
I thought we just had that synergy down.
A little bit suspicious. It's a little bit suspicious that I'm saying that now. I will grant it is, to you.
Yeah, especially because you're
I did express my concerns.
Until spoken to, a lady does not give her opinion. Okay, I didn't realize you were so proper. Kelsey, okay,
I'm old-fashioned that way. So, yes. But I expressed the concern that they would only be able to play through Doublelift, and I do kind of still feel like that's the case. Is that I do think you can give more leniency to impacts. I'm gonna segue a bit, but people's understanding in this league of how top laners are supposed to play is really bad.
Okay, come on, give us an example. What's triggered you here? Because something's set off. Some opinion set off here.
It's not even an opinion. It's just watching games with almost all teams except like Cloud9 and sometimes 100 Thieves or, I guess Echo Fox works. Yeah, it's just that the way that they set up their top laners, and when Optic Gaming like replaced their top laner with their academy top laner, and then their academy top laner performs about as well and has like about as much setup as Zig, and I just get super annoyed. But it's just going back specifically to Team Liquid, it's almost like any sort of advantage he uses in his lane, he can't necessarily pressure because jungler will be on the bottom side of the map, or he can't necessarily side lane because they have to use him to get vision. Like it's almost like they cannot get vision without having their top laner group with them. So whereas he's supposed to get farm advantages to team fight, and then people are like, but he can only play tanks. We've seen this guy play things that aren't tanks. Come on, guys. It's just that the way that they're playing with the top laner seems really, really bad.
I mean, to be fair, you do have to sort of blame the Cloud9 org for just being like, haha, we've got the other guy when it's not tanks. It's like, you did that. Like, that was never a thing.
Yeah, and I think on Cloud9, like Cloud9 was one of those teams that I actually praised because they didn't always group with their top laner. And so you got to see Impact play a more variety of styles. Even on tanks, he sidelined way more than he does on Team Liquid. So,
okay, Kelsey, here's where I ask you naive questions that would tilt me if someone asked me, because that's one of the fun things about being in my position. Okay, so, but what are you talking about? You've missed a lane there. They have Pobelter, who I'm always informed every time he gets over 3 kills is, I believe the term is, shitting on kids. Now, I've still yet to see any of this shitting on kids. I even went back and watched the very match that one of our guests recently told me, God, do you remember when he just shit on Bjerg? I went to watch those games, didn't see any shitting. I don't know what it is. Maybe I just don't know what shitting on. I thought shitting was where like Jensen just wins by like 30 CS in a matchup. He shouldn't win and gets, avoids getting ganked and therefore has 0-0-0, but did an amazing job. So what am I missing here? What can't they play through Pobelter? Mid's a pretty good lane to play through nowadays.
I have the same question as you do. Can they play through Pobelter? Because they don't seem to be willing to. They do the same thing to him they do that they do to Impact. Like, I remember this aforementioned guest that we had on the show was like, he's willing to give up a wave mid. He shouldn't give up that wave. Let him have it.
I know.
God damn it. Holy shit.
You know, the funny thing I've realised is the exact logic I used as to why this would be a good team, Kelsey, is actually why it's not a really good team, which was, obviously I was thinking of the dream world in which, Doublelift's just carrying the whole league, like no one can fuck with him. So yes, obviously I actually said, what I liked is they basically had 4 people who would understand like what they're signing up for and that this is all about like, like basically they're all just like the fucking Persians carrying like God King Doublelift like out of 300 across the area. But the downside of that is also what they think they're supposed to do. And they're not aware that like this isn't actually my fantasy from like season 3. It's actually League of Legends. And in season 8, you've actually got to be able to play through other positions, and depending on this is a crazy concept. Depending on what champions you draft, you should probably sometimes play differently. Or this is even crazier. If stuff happens in the game, you have to change up what you do as well. Like this hasn't got to them somehow. There's a disconnect there that I'm not getting. Which I have to say, to be fair, the one thing we did all, I think, collectively diss Team Liquid for is they don't necessarily seem like they have the strongest coaching staff. For all the money spent on the rest of the roster,
I feel like they tried, right? Like they do try. They cycle through certain coaches. They pick up names that should be good, right? Like they have like Kane, who was really strong, knowledgeable sport player, and then they have Charge, who is the analyst for that Fnatic roster, right? These people on
I believe
paper,
he has said that a few times that he was involved. Yeah.
So these people on paper should like have some kind of idea.
Yes.
But it doesn't necessarily seem that good right now, but we'll see, I guess.
Emily, do you think Team Liquid's a good team?
I mean, they're kind of a frustrating team for me because I look at these players and I feel like they actually, so like, even though your dream was like, you know, God double lift being like completely played around, I would say like, oh, you know, you have Impact who is, I think, more flexible than people give him credit for. You can, you know, you have Pole Belter and you can try to play around him, and they haven't done that. And even in like, so in the Echo Fox game where they lost like so hard so quickly, I touched upon how I actually think their draft was really good for what Echo Fox wants to do. You know, they have the Galio, they have the Camille, they have the Alistar, and then you have Smithy who can come in and like just completely pick off someone on the back line on Kha'Zix, like and then double lift firing over all of it on Varus. Like I like this comp a lot. And it just comes down to how the team executes it in game. And it's, I don't know, like just something on the team is not matching up. It's kind of like how I talked about TSM, and I'm like, it's some sort of like communication thing on the team where when they are able to get those leads, they look really good, right? And then when they either fall behind or they're challenged early or they lose mid priority, they just look a bit more disorganized. And I don't know, it makes me sad because I actually think this team could be more flexible than they have shown in
that's a really good roster even for that, right? Think about all the different things they could do with this team. I mean, the bizarre thing about that is, okay, I've always felt like people, even players themselves, absolutely like typecast themselves. Like this notion that like people make Odoamne, Impact rather, sound like Odoamne, like, oh, he just wants to have to only play a tank and never have any priority. It's like, well, obviously not. Like, I mean, apparently Odoamne does. Like, apparently he is actually, they've broken him. There's something wrong with him. But I doubt Impact actually wants to do that necessarily. I'm pretty sure that's just what ends up happening, you know. Like, logically, if he's so good, he can just play with no resources. Right, cool. Well, it's not like the jungler's ganking top 24/7 versus Team Liquid, is he? So just let him play wherever he wants then. Why does he then have to play a tank? Also, you've got Smithy, who plays tons of tank junglers. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and also, like, so the other frustrating thing is, like, if you're going to be executing this specific composition in the Echo Fox game, like, you do want to give Impact resources, because he's a huge part of what is going to happen when you have these fights or when you have these skirmishes, because he or Allaire are going to be the ones going in first. It's not going to be, like, you're not going to have the Galio come in until someone else goes in first. That's the ideal setup for this team. And so in that scenario, you need to give Impact resources, because otherwise he's just going to die. So, I mean, those are my concerns and issues with Team Liquid.
Can an ADC even be the guy who carries every game now? Doesn't exactly seem like the ideal meta to do it in.
Not really. I mean, I loved the episode that they did, the Team Liquid episode, where Ola had to be like coached in how to accept double feedback. That's kind of my favorite.
That is good, isn't it? Yeah.
But I don't think you can pick any role and say that this role can carry alone. It's really hard. So it's not even just an ADC specific thing. It's just hard. Excuse me.
Even Janae can't do it.
Because
every game.
Like we have Soaz on. He says my role is the most disadvantaged role, and then you would have a jungler come and say, "Oh, jungler can't do anything. Like they should make this a jungle carry meta." And it's like, okay, sure. And then you have a mid laner come on and say, we don't even lane 1v1 anymore. Yeah. We're supposed to go here and there. ADC says, I'm not self-sufficient. And support's like, well, what the fuck do you want me to do? So that's basically how it is right now.
Just listen, pro players of the world, yes, we're aware it's not solo queue. Sorry, I guess. Like, you know, what else do you want me to say? Like, what's mad is that this is how two-faced players are. Half of these players saying that shit aren't even the best at their role. Like, I don't mind if the best guy at his role is like, why can't I just carry? These are the guys who inadvertently are actually benefiting from the fact that the guy who's at their role, who's the best, can't just dumps to them. They're actually winning games off their team being good, and then they don't realise that what they wish, like, oh, just make it so it's all carries. Like, you'd get your head banged in. What are you talking about? Half these junglers who say that, like, aren't even that good. Like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Right, speaking of teams that aren't actually that good, now we can, for real, just diss a team. Emily,
yes.
You seem like such a mild-mannered person. You, even if I ask you something like, this player who's really underperforming, he's not good, you'll just say, I like him, and here's some things he did that were good, and almost, he almost did something good, and I like the way he almost did something good. I like the idea. So I want to see, this is a test for your optimism. There's no way FlyQuest is a good team, right?
Oof. Not right now, no. I think so. As much as I obviously love Fly, I think he's a really interesting player. I know, right? No, I think he's a really interesting player. Yes. But I also do think that you need to have a team that plays around him well. And
so where's the disconnect here then?
Thus far, I don't think that FlyQuest is that, and that's not even slamming on FlyQuest. It's just that Fly is such a weird mid laner where he's the mid laner that I wrote an article once 2 years ago, and it was called Lose Lane Win Game, about how KT Rolster played around him. And I think the challenge with a mid laner like Fly is that his strength obviously is that he has very good map awareness, and he can play around these champions that affect his side lanes very well. The cost is that, unlike what we were talking about with someone like Jensen, or even previously in the past when you talked about Bjergsen, how he likes to get mid priority, he will sacrifice a lot of pressure and a lot of farm for himself mid sometimes in order to do this. And that is a problem, especially with mid jungle priority being so important. And so on top of having Fly as this very unique kind of odd mid laner, you also have Onda, who is a new jungler. And that has, in my opinion, not been not been a good matchup so far. Because I don't think there hasn't been a sort of meshing of where they're going to apply pressure. And it means that FlyQuest actually cedes a lot on the map for basically nothing.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go for it.
Let's pretend that Pobelter is on the same level as Bjergsen and Jensen in terms of mechanical ability, because that helps with my setup. So we have the Jensen type mid laner, who I think right now is sort of performing at the pinnacle of understanding priority and when you can roam and map pressure and lane control and everything else. So we have that type of mid laner, and then we have Bjergsen, who's on one end of the spectrum, who is all about mid lane control and making sure you're enabling your team, but not necessarily roaming off of waves or making plays off of waves as much or doing as much with the wave. And then you have a player like Pobelter/Fly, who is giving up priority every lane to go say, oh, we really need to help the side lane snowball, okay?
Just too polite. Just holding open doors for people.
So let me explain why I'd much rather have a player like Bjergsen than a player like Pobelter, assuming that they have same mechanical skill.
Let's do it.
So mid lane is so important. It enables every time you want to get Baron vision, mid to late game, you need to be able to push out mid and then go set up your vision in the enemy jungle, set up the vision in the river. If the enemy team tries to counter push and you already have priority there, you can wait in the bush and you can collapse on them, kill them, get free Baron. So if you're constantly giving up pressure in mid lane to go help a side lane, you probably lose your turret in mid lane first, which means that the enemy team almost always will get set up for Baron Vision, set up for lane control, and this like extends to Rift Herald, this extends to Dragon, this extends to whatever else.
Yes.
So I would almost always rather have a player like Bjergsen than Pobelter, assuming that they have the same skills. So yeah, this is why I have issues with players like Fly, who give up their turret and give up control of mid for the players on their team. Like, they probably think or feel that they're doing really, really cool, good things to help their team win because they feel like they themselves can't carry, but it ends up probably being bad for them, and they have to come back from this. This is a deficit created by this that they have to come back from. So,
like, when I watched these 2 games that they played this week, like, I watch all their games, obviously, just because I like to watch Flame play. And when I watched them, first of all, a very low-key storyline that I haven't brought up a lot, just because I keep these complaints to myself. I'm aware of what people are actually interested in and what are just my own, just idiosyncratic thoughts. Just thought I'd mention to everyone on this show that you're allowed to do that. But in doing so, one thing I have not actually complained a lot about is that Flame very rarely actually plays straight up carries. He has not done that for many, many years. Even when given the choice, he often played at most a bruiser and often still would play tanks even. So when he actually finally got put on Camille, obviously I was like, right, here we go. Let's load in, fuck everyone else in the team. Let's see what can go. And basically all that made him is very powerful at killing minions, which that's not really actually fun to watch. Like, I never really thought that was great to watch. It's not really that enjoyable. What is the concept of these drafts that they're doing? Like, can you see what they think the win condition is? Because I can't really understand. Like even if I wanted to play through top lane, I don't know how those comps would ever win.
So the draft that they had against 100 Thieves is more along the lines of, I think, probably what you would want to see, where they have, like, the Camille, They have a lot of good lane priority. They're trying to... This composition is a little bit narrow in how you execute it, though. Like, Nidalee has to be able to use the fact that she clears faster than Jax to go top and make sure that she can defend Flame if they try to do, like, an Aura Dive or something with Jax. But the top 2v2 thing that I expected to happen effectively never happened. She goes bot, and there are like 3 squishies against Blitzcrank or something. And then, I don't know, the game is just played out really weird and really poorly. So I can see kind of the concept and some of the comps that they're picking. And I don't necessarily think they're bad. They just don't necessarily either play into what the enemy team is doing well, or they aren't executed well.
Is there a disconnect between the jungler and the other players? By the way, it doesn't mean necessarily it's the jungler's fault, but is there a disconnect between them, do you think?
Maybe to an extent, because I think there are a lot of basics in terms of understanding what side he should path to and what side he should set up for, like how to trade sides and stuff that Onda has from being a rookie jungler. And that could just be the team not communicating well. That could also just be Onda being new. So I don't know.
Okay. Emily, is there any hope for this team?
I mean, it's tough because I think, to Kelsey's point, like, I think Fly would really benefit from a jungle setup where it's a very experienced jungler who is on, like, an early clear champ and kind of holding down some of that pressure for him. Or the opposite, Onda would benefit from someone who really, really focuses on having strong mid lane priority. So I think that in and of itself is a mismatch.
Would FlyQuest be better then if they just brought Keen back in and just threw him in instead of Fly?
I mean, I also wouldn't consider Keen to be a mid laner who, like, really, really focuses on, like, having that kind of, like, priority that you would want out of a mid laner just for, like, a new jungler.
Abyssal Mask Cassiopeia Rush Cassiopeia just screams, I want mid lane pressure.
So then would Fly be better suited to being the mid laner of 100 Thieves?
Actually, I'd be really interested to see how that would work. Like, I would be really curious to see that, because you have 2 side lanes again. Like, so I actually think, in an ideal world where, like, everyone's performing super well and Onda is applying, like, a ton of early game pressure, right? You have 2 side lanes in Flame and then Wild Turtle that you can snowball. And, like, in this specific comp, you have Caitlyn, who you just want to rotate around to siege turrets, right? And you have Flame, who you can send off split pushing to also siege turrets, or he can come in for team fights and skirmishes. So I think, like, along those lines, yeah, like 100 Thieves has some really interesting side lanes that Fly could help out once establishing that mid priority, especially if Meteos maintains a really strong control over the jungle. That could be very interesting. Like, that's a very interesting team to me.
Because the problem here is I don't actually see... This is one of the teams in the NA LCS that I think is like absolute... Like, we have a term in English, snookered, where it's like there's no correct move to make. You lose no matter what. So in this scenario, part of the reason why I think they went with the Camille picks in these games is... Exactly. You can't just have Fly play the way he's playing and win the game. So they thought, right, well, at least top lane could do something. Like, they can't just go back to playing Gnar every game. Then what they're going to do is going to die... lose, but it take even slightly longer and do absolutely nothing. Like, what do you think that there's any way out for this team? Are they just going to be bottom of the table no matter what?
I think that the pieces could come together. It just is going to be one of those teams that requires time, and you need to be able to train your jungler and your mid to work together better. And I don't know if motivation stays for that period of time. It's probably the issue.
Okay, then. Right. I'll let you pick for this one, Emily. So, of the teams that we've got left,
who's
we've
left?
only got a few. So, we've got... By the way, it's not a good mix. So, okay, we've got Optic, CLG, and Golden Guardians. Which one do you want to talk about next?
I mean, of those, I think CLG is probably the most interesting.
Okay, you say that. You say they're interesting. You say they're interesting. Sure. I mean, you say interesting. A minute ago, you said Fly was frustrating. Is there an overlap here between interesting and frustrating that you're about to explain?
Yeah, definitely. Well, as I said before, like, I have a lot of respect for Huhi, and I feel like I've made that clear in pieces over the past few years when I've written about CLG. And so I was looking at the Huhi Reignover pairing, and I was like, oh man, like, this team, you know, they could be really interesting. I'm curious to see what they do early.
Unite. Yeah.
And then it just hasn't worked out. And then, you know, you see something like that Baron against Golden Guardians, and you're just like, how does that even happen?
Nice guys finished last, Emily. What can I tell you? I wouldn't know anything about that myself.
How with the Kalista does that Baron happen? Like, Kelsey, can you answer me this question? Like, how?
I mean, I have a jungler who stole a Kalista from Steelback's Kalista, so I don't know. I still don't know how it happened either. It's you talk to Emily and you understand that she likes Korean League of Legends. Her favorite players score. Yeah. You assume that, you know, she's written the most articles about some SK Telecom player or about score or something. No, you actually look at her archives and you count up, and she has written more articles about Huhi than any other player. It's very terrifying.
She also cited how she's a big fan of Fly.
I was surprised to find this out.
I'm really easy to identify. I write about Clear Love, you know, it's pretty typical. But her, it completely throws you off. So Counterlogic Gaming, they rely a lot on. So I feel like they're one of those teams that went into this season thinking, okay, best of ones. We have a track record for being really good at like level 1 planning. We're gonna practice level 1s. And we're going to have like really good cheese level 1s for every game, and we're going to snowball off that, and we're going to win best of 1s, and no one's going to catch us coming. Then
that didn't. Okay, yeah.
And then that didn't work.
Shit.
Because their level 1 plans continue to be pretty good game to game. Okay. But it's not working out because they don't seem to be adapting very well from there. And then the team just completely falls apart. And part of that could just be because mid lane jungle champion pools are kind of weird, so they don't have a lot of strategies they can play. I don't know. I've got nothing.
Because here's the weird thing. For a team that has only won 3 games out of 12 played, I actually don't really see people sort of like isolating one player and being like, that guy's the guy ruining the whole team. Like, what's bizarre is, in the same way as like some teams when they're winning get all the praise for everyone, somehow this is like one of the few teams I've seen where people have like evenly distributed all the blame, but without ever actually saying anyone's to blame. It's like, someone must be. There's got to be someone fucking these games up, collectively at the very least. Come on, Emily, what's the problem with CLG? Still got some good players.
So in terms of like, especially at the very beginning of the split, it was a lot of, they'd get a really strong early read on the map, and then one person, and it would vary in terms of like who this person was, which makes me think it's just a team communication thing, would like go in with no vision or no backup, and they do this like weirdly aggressive play for what was going on at the time that just didn't seem to be in coordination with what the rest of the team was trying to do. And that happened like fairly consistently, and it was just a different player every time. So like I don't know. That's kind of why I was curious to get Kelsey's take on it, because this was a team that I was like kind of excited to watch this year, and it definitely has not worked out for them.
So Kelsey, you say that the champion pool, like in terms of the strategies for jungle mid, aren't that great. Hui isn't aware of this. I mean, he's playing anything he wants. Twisted Fate, Fiora. Listen, this guy's
like 10 champions.
Yeah, he's got like the widest champion pool in the world. What are you talking about?
Huhi's so weird though, because there will be like a type of champion that's in meta, right? A type of champion that's in meta, like, okay, right now 8.4 tier stacking champions that build into archangels level 9, like super popular, right? Because this item is gross. But he would be the kind of guy who's like, I'm going to play a very obscure champion that counters this type of champion, and I'm going to invest like 300 games learning this champion, when it would take me 100 to learn this type of champion that's OP and play it on a stage level competently. And I have no idea why he does this, but it seems like, okay, I'm going to invest time into learning Aurelian's Soul instead of playing like actual meta champions. I don't know. It's really weird.
He's got his own mini game within League of Legends beyond just being a mid laner for CLG, which, quite frankly, I think that's already a pretty hard game, Hui. I'd just stick to that one, mate. Try and just win. You know what? I'm normally the champion of people who like Power of Evil. Listen, if you've got your own champion pool, you've got your own builds, do it, mate. Do the best you can. If you're Hui, I'd just maybe play things that are really good. Might win some games. Yeah, probably won't. I mean, to be fair, okay, I will admit this, Hui. You probably won't win many games. Okay, I was wrong with that part of the statement, but it'll look better.
It's funny because everyone gets super excited about Bjergsen versus Jensen, right? This is the hype NA LCS mid lane match, but it's like, I am so pumped to watch Hai versus Hui, because you know you're going to get some weird shit. Like,
well, here's the thing.
Every game.
Maybe we did this to ourselves, Kelsey. We did just spend, like, when his team was actually winning LCS, we did all just spend weeks and weeks saying, this fucking moron can play like 2 things. And he was like, that's just still echoing in his mind, like some anime flashback. 2 things, can only play 2 things. He's like, I can play everything. Okay, we get it. We get the point. Now, please go back to playing 2 things. Please. We beg of you.
Yeah, it was like weird. I think one of the regional matches between, because he was on FlyQuest versus CLG, they ended up playing some weird, like Fiora versus, what was the other mid laner? But the bans were like Aurelian Soul, just
Lucian.
a bunch of, Lucian.
Probably was, right? Yeah.
A bunch of other stuff that literally no one else was playing. I don't know. It was very entertaining, that series, just for that fact alone. Just like the mid lane counterpick my games, and they had a bunch of people playing like off-roll shit and switching lanes. It was like, okay. This is what I tune into NA LCS for, man. Has
there been a single bright spot on CLG?
Like I said, their level 1s are usually well thought out. Maybe this will be the kind of meta that suits CLG, because they can come up with probably some kind of strategy that carries them to the first Baron. And maybe they play like Nunu. I expect these guys to come out with like Nunu comp.
Just cheese all day.
And go with like 20-minute Baron strat. So
Emily, has this bot lane failed?
I mean, I'm not I don't think.
I know it's mad, isn't it? Come on.
No, so the issue for me is that when Stixxay was with Afromu, and we've talked kind of about Afro's the Engage Champions meme, but I think that had a lot to do with Stixxay was always ready to follow up, right? And he followed up really well. And I think with him and Biofrost, they kind of lack that initiation sense, and that has hurt them a lot. In fact, on this team, in terms of team fight initiators, that is also kind of an issue.
There's no one. There's just Twch, and he's off playing a different fucking game, not League of Legends.
He can't initiate on Vel'Koz, so
exactly. So there's no one, right?
Vel'Koz, I think, was also banned in that series. It was good shit. It's good.
What I love is, by the way, everyone on CLG, mostly the bot lane, if you don't like it when people make up narratives that are very, simplistic, incredibly reductionist, don't take into account a lot of factors, especially ones that just play off storylines, they're not even very deeply connected to the game. You are the reason why these exist, because you literally made meme math actually accurate. People used the meme math of Doublelift was really bossy, so I bet this Biofrost won't be very sort of dominant in lane. And then they were like, well, Afromu was one of the best players at the support position and sort of led the whole team. So Stixxay probably just also won't really be a dominant person. And then you guys even said to yourselves, no, we're going to prove them wrong. And it's you haven't. You proved them completely right. Now, yes, I will acknowledge they're not right for any of those reasons. Obviously, none of those reasons actually mean anything in League of Legends, but you have absolutely played right into their hands, and you've made yourself look foolish, and meme math has actually worked for once. Except for when it's just to do with TSM in the jungle, where apparently it's just a axiom of the universe that they're never allowed to have strong synergy between the two primary positions that a jungler would help. Right. Let's the last two can usually go pretty quick here, Emily. So let me just ask you this. What do you think of Optic Gaming? I mean, I have to say that they've actually won more games than I thought they would. I thought they would be contending for last place, win 2 or 3 games in the whole league.
Who did you think they'd be contending with? Golden
Guardians and them, I thought would just be in a battle for can we win any games?
I mean, I think the thing, what Kelsey spoke to about how they treat their top laner is something that's
they're
pretty
probably
important.
Not even aware that they've changed top laner. They just.
I also think that, so just as someone who has watched Arrow for a really long time, it was always kind of humorous to me when people would say after, I think it was his first split last year with P1, I want to say is when this started, where people would talk about how he's this super lean dominant AD carry, and I'm like, that is a very interesting take, because that's really not what I've seen him out of his career at all, with the one exception of the Draven pick, right? Because obviously he is the reason why he's has picked Draven is because he used to be kind of a Draven one trick, and that was the champ he would play to get lane dominance. So I think there is a bit of a problem on this team with Arrow. He isn't really going to be necessarily the type of AD carry that's going to get a lot of bot lane priority. Lemon Nation, I know a lot of people have been very, very critical of him as well on this team. And I think, again, this is not a bot lane that you can rely on to get any sort of lane priority. The way that Optic kind of plays around top is a bit off. So then you have just PoE in the mid lane in terms of what you're looking at for lanes that are applying pressure more consistently. And so I think that is an issue with this team that I see very frequently.
Just want to point out, it's like the one time PoE is on a team with a sick bot lane or whatever, he looks bad, but every other time he has this syndrome where it's like, my bot lane can't carry, so obviously this team is like somehow winning games, so he must be a super sick player. And it's like the story every time with this guy.
European Pobot, we call him.
But I don't know. He plays a couple champions that, like, he has a very specific way to play, and I think the way that people know PoE and have experience with PoE, he is very proficient at knowing what he's good at and sticking to that. And I think that this is consistent. It hasn't always been this. He hasn't always been good at like the same one thing, but he'll pick something in this particular meta, and he'll be really good at that one thing. But it doesn't give the team a lot of flexibility. Like, they have to be able to play around him playing this one specific thing, and if you, I don't know, feel like banning Orianna or something, then maybe it becomes more difficult.
What I love as well is, even though they play for Optic, which, you know, in terms of general esports has a massive fan base, as far as I can tell, people don't even really flame Optic that hard. No one just gives a fuck in League of Legends. The only airtime they ever get is when their fucking, like, general manager just comes out to then, again, tell us all in the 50th variation how we should all succeed at our jobs, and then goes back into his fucking, I don't know, his room and just does the Men in Black thing to delete all the last week's games from his own brain, apparently. Like, you know, I mean, maybe just try making Optic Gaming succeed. That would be a good way to teach us your philosophy, sir. You know, or just dress up as, well, that's the problem, isn't it? I've made the classic mistake there, Kelsey. I've just answered my own question. Obviously, he has to do the interviews because he can't just dress up as some sort of a mascot. Optic doesn't have one. He could dress up as a wall, a green wall. There we go.
There you go.
Because sometimes I feel like, it doesn't really work that one, does it? It almost works.
You just see, this is really easy because this guy likes taking off his shirt and he works on his abs a lot, so he just paints his front green.
And
there you go, green wall.
He's built like a brick house. Yeah, I've got to give him credit. Yeah, you've got the abs.
There you go.
So basically, in the same, to take the same sort of image, I'm just the little kid spray painting the graffiti on the wall, running away when someone, hey, what are you doing there? No, just run away. I get out and he's like, hey, toxicity will never pay. Stay in school. I'm like, yeah, I made a career out of toxicity, motherfucker. I didn't really, but now sadly that clip exists on the internet, so I did. So at this point I did. Sorry, that's over. Right, one team left in the league. Kelsey, are you ready for this? I've actually set this up because everyone's going to think, haha, oh, he's just bringing up Golden Guardians because they're so shit and we all know they're bad. They are, but are you ready for this?
Okay.
Golden Guardians has won 3 of their last 5 games. That's a winning record if you only count 5 games. They must be on the up, right?
Hey, technically my team has the same record.
Well, now you brought us right back down again. I was trying to create a positive environment here to end the episode.
Yeah, so the past 5 games, yeah. I mean, I do feel like they've kind of hit a stride, maybe a honeymoon period. I still feel like this team is just limited by individual skill to an extent. I am glad they're doing better. Actually, really glad. I think that they'll have that 8.4 should actually be a good meta for them, to be honest. Because I think that they have decent Baron control. So maybe 8.4 is a good meta for them. They can play tank top and rush banner seconds.
If they don't have that many good, good players, are we to assume that actually, if you ignore the fact that yes, you actually still have to have competent players to execute macro concepts and how to play the game, are they actually decent as a team if you ignore the individual skill?
I actually thought this team, so to make two comparisons, I guess, the first would be, I thought this team would be slightly better out of the gate, just based on how many other like hybrid rosters there were. So I was like, oh, okay, if this team's going to do well, it's going to be in the very beginning of the split, similar to FlyQuest last year.
Yes.
But I also think like this team, if they can figure out how to use the pieces that they do have and come up with smart compositions that do complement their players, even though obviously this is not like the most stacked roster talent-wise.
I mean, I
think another team you'd want to compare them to would actually be the current iteration of the Rocks Tigers, right? Which is just a team that if they can get the synergy down on this team, which was kind of the point, right? Like they all wanted to go, as far as I know, they all wanted to go for North American talent so that there wouldn't be any sort of communication issue on the team, or that fixing communication issues might be a little bit easier. This is a team that if they do hit their stride, you could see them pulling out really specific compositions that suit their play style. So instead of focusing outward, just completely focusing inwardly, like the Rocks Tigers have in the LCK, and really playing around the individual pieces they have and making the most of like a gathering team synergy. That is how I could see this team performing better. Like that's what I kind of had hoped for this team, I guess.
Right now they feel kind of reliant on contracts getting like off a cheesecake and snowballing. And I don't even think he's playing that smart. He's just kind of shocking people a little bit. Like he'll play the risky Camille type pick, and you have to get like level 2 or level 3 gank to work, and then you just snowball. And I think that's like the kind of approach he's going for. And I understand why he's doing it, because he is, in my opinion, the most individually skilled player on the team that also has like kind of a carry mentality. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
What about this then? Was it ever actually, like, I'm assuming this is obviously a team that in theory has some money. Was it ever actually explained why contracts specifically ended up on this team? I mean, you look at half the teams we've talked about in the middle of the table could probably use a player like contracts.
It feels almost like there was a situation like with the C9 and Selfie situation where they waited a while before they found someone, and then he didn't necessarily know he was being replaced, maybe.
Right.
And then came up late on the market, and then Golden Guardians were one of the last teams to finalize their rosters, and so he ended up going there. Maybe he wanted to play with High. I don't actually know, but that seems like if we take the example of the C9 situation, then maybe that also happened with contracts. Okay. So.
Right.
I mean, he's also... so I wrote about this because I interviewed him a bunch of times across the split, but I know he did also want to... and this is more of like a side effect of leaving C9, not necessarily like a reason for leaving C9, but I know that he did, outside of C9, really want to try to work on becoming a voice, because he's admitted that that's something that he's not as strong with, because he's naturally like more of a shy person in terms of communication. And he recognizes that most like great junglers, right, have that communication skill set. Like it's very important, because you do have to do a lot of early game communication, as a jungler, and a lot of people are feeding you information. So I know that was also something that he said, like, and he said admittedly, like, I haven't improved on it as much as I had wanted to. But and I don't know if I was the only interview that he said that in, but it's in an interview that's already out. Where he talked a lot about how he really wants to become a stronger voice, and how that still hasn't happened this year thus far. But it is something that he wants to work on. Now, I don't know if that was like an impetus for leaving C9, but I know once he was outside of C9, he's like, this is a weakness that I have as a player that I really want to focus on.
Yes. Well, I mean, if you play with Jensen, he'll actually inform you at all times of the status of all your weaknesses, mental and physical. So it's quite cool, actually. It gives you sort of a full checkup during the game. So,
well, I also think Smoothie has a huge voice on that team too. So obviously, like as a new jungler, I think he found himself listening a lot more than He does on GG.
I mean, yeah, okay, clearly let's join the team with High on it then.
Yeah, which is...
Yeah, hi, can you shut the fuck up, please? I'm trying to talk here. So what we're going to do next is... Are you listening, guys? Okay, what about this time? I forget who told me this. Fuck it, because I think it was in an interview. I can't remember who it was, but someone's theory as to why they thought FlyQuest did well in that first split but then fell off is they even said they don't actually think that actually, like, you know, Fly was like... High, rather, was like... completely like reading the game perfectly, but they actually said they thought it just the fact that because everyone listened to him and just did everything he said, it had the upside, which is the famous upside of having one person call, which is like, well, at least everyone's on the same page. Does Golden Guardians have any of that quality?
I mean, based on what Lokodoko said when we interviewed him, it was like he actually did ask Kai to take a step back in terms of leadership so that the rest of the team would learn. I don't know if that was actually applied in practice. Maybe that's why we're seeing the slight upswing after Lokodoko leaves, because Hai's just like, yeah, fuck it, we tried it his way.
Well, in the end, they actually asked Lokodoko to take a step back and stop talking so much. Too soon. So still love you, Loco. Just
now Hai is taking more leadership. Exactly. I don't actually have any idea. It was just kind of a joke.
You have to understand, Loco. Like, this is part of the healing process. You know, it becomes tragedy, and then you add time. It becomes comedy. It becomes memes, and eventually, before you know it, you're back coaching a team in the LCS again.
Yeah.
Maybe the last part might not happen for you, but I'm pulling for you anyway. So, right, let's close up the episode with. I think what we'll do is this, Emily. Okay. Who do you think has been the best player in the LCS this split?
Ooh.
Who stood out the most for you?
I'm gonna go with... Someone asked me this, like, who would be my MVP? And I'm on the fence between Huni and Smoothie, but I'm gonna go with Smoothie.
Wait a second, right? Kelsey, should we let her explain first, or would you like to set up advanced positions on the Huni argument? Has she triggered you sufficiently?
Yeah, I was kind of I expected you to turn around on the Smoothie thing, but then
No. We're going to the Huni one first. What do you think? Are you shocked she would pick Huni?
I mean, he's played well within the role that he's been given for his team, so sure, I think you can do that. I always, when I do MVPs, I usually go with okay, winning team, someone on that team should get MVP shout out for sure, at least, even if you don't end up voting them first. So if you do top 3 MVP candidates, one of them at least should be from the first ranked team. So Huni is a decent choice. For sure, from that roster, you'd either go Huni or Dardoch, probably. So
okay. Well, I mean, that's fucking between a rock and a hard place, right? So, why Huni then? Why has he stood up for you?
I mean, I think he, again, they just for the role that he's asked to play on that team, he does everything at basically the highest level that you'd want him to perform at, right? So, I mean, that's why I value him so highly on that team.
People talk about Phoenix, and she mentioned this earlier where Dardoch is always playing on top side, but if you actually do an analysis of which lanes Dardoch ganks, he ganks mid way more than any other lane. And so Phoenix is operating a lot more off of jungle pressure than I think Huni is. Obviously, Huni gets advantages from mid lane pressure, but so does their bot lane. And Huni he wins matchups against a lot of top laners that he shouldn't win. He is always able to kind of have pressure. Maybe he goes a little bit too ham in that regard. Maybe the Baron setups aren't that great. I don't think Baron setups are that great in terms of him, and his side lane pressure in relation to Baron on SKT either. So that was an issue then. It's an issue now. But yeah, I probably would go Dardoch. I don't necessarily think that he's been the best jungler, but I think that he has played precisely how his team has needed to play in the majority of the games. And they've gotten a lot off of that, and that's more my criteria for MVP than just like best player overall.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, as someone who's followed the career of Clearlove, you can appreciate someone who is actually the best player who happens to be a jungler, but not necessarily the best jungler. So just a standard bit there. Okay, wasn't bad. Okay, Emily, why was Smoothie the other choice?
So I brought it up when we talked about C9, and I know a lot of
because it was British. Okay, let me quickly say this then. Mm-hmm. By the same logic that you pick Tooney for Echo Fox, most people would obviously instantly go Jensen if you go on
Jensen,
right?
Yeah.
So what differentiates Smoothie for you?
I think Smoothie has a lot to do with the way they approach playing around topside, like I said, in terms of roaming for the team, which is why, again, I want to see teams when they do go after C9, in addition to what we saw from 100 Thieves. Like, I think also attacking bot side is really smart, because if you keep Smoothie in lane, it really affects how the team wants to play, especially with a new top laner. I've always highly valued Smoothie's contributions to the team. I think he's really smart about how he approaches the game. I know he's a huge voice in comms. I think he can affect the map really well, more than any other support in North America, outside of like maybe Afromu at times. So I like, in that way, I just highly value his contribution to what C9 has done this split. Okay. I mean, it's not that I don't highly value Jensen's either. No, like, I totally see the argument for Jensen as well.
Yes. Okay. Kelsey, what do you think of this? Smoothie MVP of the NA LCS.
I think you asked me on the preseason episode who I would pick for MVP, and I did say Smoothie was a potential person, but I just, like, I don't understand. I'm just really on the Jensen train this season, I think.
I mean, this season especially, right? It's like almost every criticism he had in the last years where everyone was like, yeah, maybe he's very good at laning, but he doesn't do anything from that. He does everything. What more do you want? Well, that would be my question, right?
I actually think it's just so hard to be, like, as efficient as he is with his roam timings and stuff like this. It's just really hard to get down, and very few mid laners do it correctly. So that's why I'm just really on top of how well Jensen controls the map right now. I think Smoothie does it to an extent. Like, he was probably the best support player in terms of the spellbook TP support. A lot of supports just use that super reactively, or they would teleport and give up all control of bot when they did it. But I feel like Smoothie did it probably the best. He's still sometimes ceded bot control, and I didn't think they needed to. But yeah, I mean, I'm not against the Smoothie choice. I think either Smoothie and in terms of their Baron fights and their Baron setups, Smoothie is actually super good. I think in the C9 100 Thieves game, there was a perfect window for Licorice to use side lane pressure and teleport, and then Smoothie basically identified it, used the Terra Cult, and then Licorice teleported in and then just like screwed up his engage. But that's not Smoothie's fault. I was just like, yeah, he got that. He knew that. He made the call. That was really good. So, yeah.
Here's the sick thing. I've just realized. I actually did legitimately just realize this as you were talking there. The great parting thought, I thought, is that, do you remember when that possibly deranged individual on Twitter, when this is a few months back, it was what happens is every year, Emily, there's like an annual festival, but it changes what month it's on, where loads of people come out and actually, you know, they have a lot of like a chant that they sing about me. They'll say like, he's sexist, he's racist, I don't know, nowadays I'm a transphobe as well, apparently, whatever the new term is. And in doing so, right, Kelsey naively attempted to like defend the just abstract position that maybe I'm not. And in doing so, right, someone tried to imply like, well, you know, okay, even if you say all those other things, is he sexist though? I mean, he works with a lot of women. And what they said, this was genius. They said, no, where he just does that to control women, and then he sets them up to fight against each other. It's pretty good. I'm just saying, if you look at the context of this episode, they win. Everything they said was right. This is all just about pitting women against each other. definitely wasn't about just League of Legends and talking about fucking Fly and macro concepts and laying priority. Basically, none of the interesting shit. If this was some sort of
Fly.
I know. If this was hardly some intellectual catfight, was it? It's like the most dry shit ever. But
wow.
This episode was DryQuest. Right there.
This is why I miss doing videos with Kelsey, is because she's doing analyst work now, so
exactly.
I don't have time to do our videos anymore.
Yeah,
we'll extend on that note then, not just depressing, fucking mournful note.
Emily and I used to be friends and co-workers. Now we're
not
at odds just because of Thorin.
I know, but I'm sorry. I won't be telling officially who the winner was, but in my internal in-house ranking of women that I work with, I will judge the scorecard, and the winner will be rewarded with success in their career because I do control the whole industry. So.
Sure.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Michael Allaire, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Gman, Twch, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, TGreb, Jake Petrucci, Yordan, Tsenkov, Daniel Yordanov. Want to get exclusive teasers for my upcoming work? Submit questions for me or make suggestions for my content? Become a part of the ever-growing Scrolluminati via Patreon link in the description box below.